Good morning, everyone. By my watch, it's still 2 minutes before noon, so it's still morning. Welcome to the Shad and River Herring Board. My name is Bill Goldsboro. I have the honor of being the new chair of the board. We may have forgotten that sequence since we haven't had a meeting in a year, but Terry Stockwell was the previous chairman. I thank Terry for his service. He didn't let any species get listed on his watch. Let's all take a look at the agenda. Does anybody have any additions or changes they'd like to recommend? Seeing none, we'll consider the agenda approved. The proceedings from the May 15th meeting are in the meeting information. Does anybody have any changes to offer for them? Seeing none, the proceedings from the May 15 or 2015 meeting stand approved. We'll take public comment at this time for any issues that are not on the agenda. I see a hand in the back. Des, there's a public mic right back there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Desmond Kahn. I worked for Delaware for a couple of decades, and I was on many of the technical committees for the commission during that period. I sent you all an email, or as many of you as I had the email addresses for, an email yesterday, and on the subject of striped bass predation on shad and herring. And in that email, I attached a paper that I presented last summer at the American Fisheries Society annual meeting in Portland, Oregon. And I was invited to speak at a symposium on conservation and utilization for sustaining our fisheries. And the title of my talk was Management of a Top Inshore Predator, Deferring Recreational and Commercial Goals and the Impacts on Other Fisheries. And I'm sure many of you are aware of a couple of the points I'm briefly going to try to make today. Let's see. We're trying to manage shad and herring, yet at the same time, we have built up one of their primary predators to very high abundance levels. And I think we're kind of working at cross purposes there. My background is in ecology, and in ecology we've learned that when a primary predator builds up to high abundances, its primary prey usually decline. And I'm sure many of you know that the primary prey of striped bass has been found to be members of the herring family, including shad and river herring. There is conclusive scientific evidence now that in several river systems, particularly the Connecticut River and the Delaware River, striped bass predation has driven down the abundance of American shad and river herring. And some of that, presented some graphs of that in my paper. This was documented in the Connecticut River by Dr. Victor Kreco, who's really the world's authority on American shad. He's published more peer-reviewed scientific papers on this topic than anyone on the topic of American shad. He documented that in the 2007 assessment, but with Tom Savoy, who also works for Connecticut. Dr. Kreco has since retired, but they tried to bring this information to the board, but their report was removed from the body of the report and put in as an appendix. And a separate report for the Connecticut River was written, and their names were put on the report, and it was published as part of the assessment, although they never saw this report. If you go back to that assessment and you look at the appendix, you will find their report detailing the way that striped bass predation really controlled the abundance of shad. So I think we have to start taking a look at some of the trade-offs in our management among species and really take an ecosystem-based approach. So I'd like to encourage you to start thinking about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Des. From that email, it looked to me like it went to, or it didn't go to the most current list of LOCID board members, so maybe staff can make sure that all of you that may not have gotten it do get it. I found the presentation to be very interesting, a good reminder about ecosystem-based management needing to be a priority. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 4, and Jeff, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just be giving a quick update on the upcoming American shad and river herring assessments and a slight change to the assessment schedules for those species. So just a little background, the most recent stock assessments for American shad, there was a benchmark stock assessment in 2007, and there was a benchmark stock assessment for the river herring species in 2012. So what we're proposing is a stock assessment update for river herring in 2017. That recommendation was made in the 2012 benchmark assessment with an update in 5 years, which would be 2017, and a benchmark assessment 10 years from that assessment, which would be 2022. We did have a call with the technical committees and discussed this recommendation and felt that this was still an appropriate recommendation. Technical committee members did note that there are some beneficial monitoring efforts that have come due to Amendment 2 that will hopefully be useful in a benchmark assessment, but due to the short time series of those monitoring efforts, a update at this time is still appropriate. There's also the need to develop robust stock-specific ocean bycatch estimates that preclude a lot of the assessment approaches that are done in other assessments and for other species. But there are some developments with some genetic studies looking at the ocean bycatch that hopefully will be useful in a benchmark assessment down the road. And we did propose to move this assessment update from 2018, where it was originally on our stock assessment schedule, up to 2017, and that's due to NOAA's Fisheries revisiting the Endangered Species Act listing determination made in 2013, which they said they would be revisiting 5 years from that date, and they're hoping to have the information from this assessment update for that revisiting of that listing determination. For the American shad stock assessment, we're proposing an update of that assessment to be completed in 2018. But we did want to note that we want to keep flexibility to potentially change that to a benchmark assessment, and that determination would be made at a data workshop when we have a better chance to look at the data that have come online since the last benchmark assessment for American shad. Similar to river herring, there were notes of the beneficial monitoring efforts due to Amendment 3 for that species. However, again, it was noted that there would be a particularly short time series for most of those new monitoring efforts. And again, for American shad as well, there's the need to develop robust stock-specific ocean bycatch estimates for that species as well to move to some more complex assessment approaches. And so we've proposed to move this assessment update from 2017 to 2018 to accommodate the river herring assessment. And those changes to the stock assessment schedule will be presented tomorrow to the policy board. And so the timetables for these assessments moving forward, we plan to have a webinar with the technical committees and stock assessment subcommittees in late May. And I did want to note here that the stock assessment subcommittees for shad and river herring will need to be repopulated. So Kirby will be reaching out to the commissioners to repopulate those stock assessment subcommittees. We plan to have a joint data workshop for shad and for river herring in the fall of 2016 due to the overlap in some of the folks that will be working on those assessments and also some of the similarities in the data that we'll be going over. We felt that this was a more efficient use of a data workshop to combine those. And then following that data workshop, efforts will focus on completing the river herring assessment update in 2017. And once that update is completed, we'll then focus our efforts on completing the American Shad assessment update by 2018. So that's my update. If there are any questions on those upcoming assessments, I can take those now.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff on the stock assessment timetable? Yes, Rob.
Not on the timetable, but more, if I may, on the genetic study to look at the ocean intercept fishery. And I'm curious as to what is thought about there for that type of study. There were some studies done in the past, both tagging and genetic, but it was mitochondrial DNA study in the 90s, and I think before the ASMFC went on the closeout of the American Shad intercept fishery, there was talk of maybe having sort of a synoptic study to look closely at the intercept fishery, but that never really materialized, so I'm wondering how involved this next study is, and will it utilize the results from the former studies, which those studies didn't really corroborate each other very well. And in fact, the tagging study in the early 90s had sort of contradictory results depending on which study it was. One study gave more of a northern intercept of northern stocks, Connecticut and other stocks north, and the second time around it was more of a southerly approach as far as where the fish were being intercepted. And the mitochondrial DNA study didn't really balance that out either. So, so a couple questions would be, tap into the old existing data, and how involved is this genetic study going to be? What type of a genetic study is it going to be exactly? Is it a nuclear DNA study? What's anticipated? Thanks.
So the study it was recently published in 2012 that I mentioned specifically. I don't know the details of it, but it did find disproportionate effects of ocean bycatch on some of the different genetic distinct stocks. And I think that information will be synthesized with the studies you just mentioned and some of that other information. However, I think that information will come more into play when we move to benchmark assessments, when we have a better handle on the ocean bycatch, not only the magnitude of that bycatch, but also how to partition that across the different stocks we're assessing the population at. So I think, again, that information will come more into play when we move to a benchmark assessment. And again, we'll synthesize that genetic study with hopefully any of the other existing information, being tagging study or genetic studies that have been done in the past.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, Rob, go ahead.
Sort of a follow-up, but so the absence of a shad fishery in the ocean, and the absence of a directed fishery, and the absence of a directed fishery in the bay, for the most part, for many, many years, this type of information could be very good for the the natal areas to have this information.
Thanks, Rob. Anything else on the assessment timetable? Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the American Shad assessment in 2018, is that going to be an update or a full benchmark assessment? Thank you.
Yes, so the plan right now is that will be an update of the 2007 benchmark stock assessment, with the potential to move to a benchmark assessment if the Technical Committee and Stock Assessment Subcommittee feel that is warranted once we sit down at the data workshop happening this fall and feel that there are either new data that could be incorporated or different assessment approaches that were not looked at in that 2007 assessment that could potentially be useful in a new benchmark assessment in 2018.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's move on to agenda item 5. Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to go through this item pretty quickly, and happy to take any questions as they may come up. So in May of 2015, the TC and members of the TUG recommended to the board that a workshop be conducted looking at data collection and standardization of current monitoring programs across the coast. And the focus would be on those fishery-independent survey programs. And this recommendation really went hand in hand with some of the research needs that were outlined in the 2012 stock assessment for river herring. So in November of 2015, staff worked with NOAA Fisheries in pulling together a data standardization collection workshop that was approximately 2.5 days in Baltimore. We had 30 participants, including 15 state agencies, 2 federal agencies, NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, 1 federally recognized tribe, and members from Canada's Department of Fisheries and Ocean. And going into the workshop, we had each of those reps send us their monitoring program write-ups first and their data, and to kind of categorize it by survey type to really try to break it out and discuss each of these really by category and biological sampling. So coming out of that workshop, the group was able to make a number of recommendations, as I said, by survey type, looking at what are the best ways to move most of the surveys that are being conducted along the coast towards a more standardized approach. That was generated primarily from those state and federal partners who are currently leading those surveys and have been doing them for a long time series. Trying to get these surveys in line in terms of a standardized approach by survey type is really important for being able to compare across different parts of the coast, and this approach is useful for helping us move forward in the next stock assessment. So in highlighting both what the best ways to move towards standardization and the financial costs in doing so, the workshop was really useful in outlining how we can start to move things towards more uniform approaches across different regions of the coast. The other part was recommendations on biological sampling to make sure that all the current agencies involved in monitoring river herring are able to collect the same data, and we're able to then utilize that in the next assessment. So the workshop report was completed in early 2016. We have it now up on our website. It was included in the meeting materials. We have a hard copy available in the back of the room if people are interested. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions. I'll also point out that Jeff Kipp was also there and took part, and between the two of us, we're happy to answer any follow-up questions you have on the workshop. Thanks.
Questions on the workshop? Seeing none. Thank you, Kirby. Let's move on then to agenda item 6.
All right, so on a related note, I'm going to provide you guys an update on some of the activities of the River Herring Technical Expert Working Group, often referred to as the TUG. So TUG activities in 2015, some of the major highlights that I just wanted to make clear to the board was this time last year, the conservation plan was made available online. This is a website that NOAA, that lives on NOAA's website, and basically lays out all the current monitoring programs, the research needs, the management program in place for river herring across the coast, and it was helped informed by the TUG in providing the specific information that's needed to further the conservation of river herring. In addition to the conservation plan, there was funding of a number of restoration projects, including doing run counts in the St. Croix watershed, doing dam removals on the exterior river, and barrier removals in Connecticut, And another important point that will be touched on later on today with climate change is NIMS's participation in the Northeast Fisheries Science Center's Climate Vulnerability Assessment. One procedural thing that I wanted to highlight for the board moving forward is that the two leading up to the making the conservation plan publicly available have been meeting quarterly and having subcommittee meetings in support of those quarterly meetings. Because the conservation plan is now online and we're in more of a maintaining that plan and providing updates when needed, full TUG meetings are now going to be twice a year. Subcommittees can still meet as often as they see are needed for talking about issues relevant to their subgroup, but there will be a move to also have an annual report that highlights what the previous year's big research endeavors were, conservation endeavors, and outcomes of TUG meetings. So we're in the process of finalizing the 2015 summary, executive summary. That's gone out to TUG members this week, and we will hopefully have that up online in the next couple weeks. So with that, I'll take any other questions there are on TUG activities. Thanks.
Questions for Kirby on the work group? You guys are making it way too easy. All right. And let's move on to agenda item 7. Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to go through the 2015 Shad and River Herring FMP review and compliance report. So generally, there's been a steady decline in landings over time, as many of you are aware, and this has been in part to the moratorium that was implemented through Amendments 2 and 3. States with shad commercial landings were New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. States with river herring commercial landings were Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Maryland, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And again, states that are able to maintain these fisheries are ones that have demonstrated through their sustainable fishing plans that they can do so. This is a report again for 2014 landings, the 2014 fishing year as opposed to 2015. We have a lag in the time between when we receive compliance reports and we're able to report out on them. So in 2014, a total of 776,000 pounds of American shad were landed and 1.8 million pounds of river herring were landed and 119,000 pounds of hickory shad were landed, and this is coastwide. The largest states for landings of shad were North Carolina and South Carolina, and the largest landings for river herring was Maine at 1.8 million pounds. In looking at river herring passage counts, the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and South Carolina all currently collect data on river herring passage counts. And coastwide in 2014, 2.86 million river herring were counted. Coastwide for shad, it was 747,000 shad. What this represents relative to the 2013 fishing year is about a 1% increase in the passage counts for river herring and about a 96% increase for shad. When looking at coastwide stocking programs, currently Maine, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and South Carolina are currently engaged in stocking programs. For 2014, 26.4 million shad were introduced and contributed, as well as 296,000 alewife. Percentage increases relative to 2013 is about a 45% increase for American shad relative to 2013, and about a 10% increase for river herring compared to 2013. So another component of the shad and river herring compliance reports are sturgeon interactions. In 2014, there was 101 interactions reported in the states of Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. All were released alive with the exception of one fatality. And last, in terms of de minimis requests, the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida have submitted de minimis requests for shad, and for river herring, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida have requested for river herring, and all these states meet the requirements for de minimis. So at this point, I'll take any questions any of the board members have on compliance reports and FMP review for shad and river herring. Thanks.
Questions for Kirby? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out you didn't have Delaware listed as a state that is stocking shad, and we are. Thanks.
Other questions on the FMP review or the compliance reports or the de minimis requests? Bill Adler?
Is it appropriate for a motion to accept the de minimis recommendations yet?
If I see no other hands, can we take this hand first, Bill? I'll come back to you. Sherry?
I just had a question on the compliance reports. On unreported, again, I'm sorry, I'm a little new to this committee, or this board. What is done with all of the unreported information that is indicated in the state's compliance reports?
So it's a good question. You're referring to the biological sampling requirements that are asked of the states, or samplings that are done of different fisheries?
Well, I believe that there are standards that are defined as to what a compliance report needs to submit. And I presume that if those are not included in the compliance report, that is what is reflected under unreported information and compliance issues. Are those ever pursued to be completed throughout the year? Or are they something that is a repetitive pattern that is never really addressed and we're missing information due to all this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. For shad and river herring, one of the issues we've run into is that because there has been a moratorium for much of the fisheries that used to be in place for both species along the coast, a lot of the reporting requirements for biological sampling that are contingent on rec fisheries and commercial fisheries to be taking place then preclude us from being able to get data on those fisheries when they're no longer happening. So there's requirements that came out of Amendment 2 and Amendment 3 asking for states to have these report outs annually, but if they don't have those fisheries anymore, then they no longer are able to collect that data. The other issue that a number of the states have is in terms of funding and staffing, that if they aren't able to annually provide that data through a fishery independent survey, because they don't have staff able to do it, then it becomes an issue where they annually aren't able to report out on it, even if it's a requirement.
So is that defined? You know, it isn't really indicated that clearly on a state-by-state basis under the underreported information. Can that in the future be defined so that we can understand those reasonings behind some of this unreported information?
Yes, and you know, this was discussed by the plan review team, and you know, we took notes on that, went through each item that a state, for example, hadn't provided information and was noted. Though I thought I had provided summary information under that for most of the states. If I could, if you have specifics on certain states, I can go back and give you some more information. And in the future, we can look to provide more information under each of those items that are not listed in depth.
Yes, I'm willing to take this offline. Thank you.
Any other questions for Kirby? Oops. Roy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm curious about the Massachusetts de minimis request for river herring. Mike, I seem to recall many years ago now, a considerable effort on the part of Massachusetts for providing fish passage for river herring. Has that program fallen on hard times? It was Buzzy DiCarlo, if memory serves, was your expert in that regard, and have the river herring subsequently disappeared from those systems that were laddered? Thank you.
No, actually the program's quite robust, and our runs are really back to historic levels right now, in part due to the ladder work we've been doing. But we request de minimis because right now we have zero harvests from the runs.
Other questions? Okay, Bill, I'm back to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to approve the 2015 FMP review of the 2014 fishing year and approve de minimis requests. These de minimis requests are for river herring, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida, and for shad, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida.
Thank you, Bill. Is there a second? A second from Steve. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your right hand, please. Oops, I'm sorry. It's, we're going to wait till we get the motion up on the board, make it official here. Okay, Bill, does that reflect your motion? Okay, let's try this again. Motion's on the board. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? Null votes? Motion passes unanimously. All right. We're on to agenda item 8. Roy?
Mr. Chairman, just out of curiosity, considering what we just did, since so many states are closed for river herring harvest, directed harvest, like in our state, perhaps in this next updated stock assessment, it would be good if we re-examined the definition of de minimis and what the requirements are for a de minimis state in terms of reporting. Thank you.
Good point, Roy. Thank you. Okay. As I said at the outset, I've just ascended to the chair, which means the vice chair seat is vacant, and we need to fill it. So I'll take any motions for vice chair. Mike Armstrong.
I would move to nominate John Clark as vice chair to the Shad and River Herring Management Board.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second? See a second from Dave Simpson. We need Pat Augustine here, but maybe lacking that, I'll just go the old-fashioned way and say, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? Null votes? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Congratulations, John, and thank you. Is there any other business to come before the Shad and River Herring Board? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Out of the town, be careful.